This. Yes. Okay. So welcome to our third webinar series. This is, again, a very exciting one where we're going to be looking at a large river basin in Latin America, South America, thinking about the ways in which political economies are changing and how we can rethink about the environment, the values, and also better grasp the systemic pressures that are going on. In the past couple of episodes, we talked about some of the big ideologies that underlie the assumptions that underlie development. We hopped over to Southeast Asia in the Mekong region in the last episode, where we talked about various issues around dams and thinking about collective action and what kind of things motivates people to take part in these collective action versus individual action when it comes to thinking about compensation, alternative livelihoods when dams are created in their watersheds. So in this third webinar, we are going to be having two speakers, Pilar and Irun, and they're going to be giving us some ideas of what they've experienced through their own insights, looking at issues of groundwater management, irrigation, thinking about the role of state, thinking about the role of non-state actors as well. So I'm really looking forward to this very enriching, very intense 1 hour that we have together with you. So thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Naho Mirumachi. I work at the Geography Department at King's College London, and I've been hosting this webinar series along with Alan, my colleague. Alan, you want to say a couple of words?
Yeah, thanks very much, Naho, and welcome everyone. So I'm Alan Nicol. I direct our Water Growth and Inclusion Programme at the International Water Management Institute, and I'm very happy to be part of this hosting of these exciting webinars with a very open, discursive environment we're encouraging. And on that note, I want to encourage you, as we go through these two great presentations, to put your ideas, thoughts, questions into the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat. And when we get to the Q&A, I'll be inviting people to verbalize their questions and to contribute from the floor. So up to that point, please do keep your microphones muted, but we look forward to a very open and free-ranging discussion. Back to you, Naho.
All right, so as I mentioned, we have two speakers today. Pilar from the Federal University of Sao Paulo will first speak for about 10 minutes, and she's going to be talking about the Guarani Aquifer. And with her legal background, she'll give us some insights on the legal challenges, the legal perspectives of how we value water, especially when we can't see it in the form of groundwater. And then we'll move on straight over to Irun at the University of Wageningen, and where he's going to be talking about the case of Peru, looking at gold mining. And he's had a range of experiences working with local communities, as well as looking into how agribusinesses and other kinds of businesses sort of intersect in this very contested waterscape. So please do have plenty of questions for both of our speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the floor on to Pilar.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Nahu, for the invitation. I'm very honored to this opportunity. I should warn that we have very few studies about the value of groundwater in Brazil. Even in the case of Guarani Aquifer, which is the greatest aquifer diva in relation to the other 108 aquifers that Brazil has, and the other 10 transboundary groundwater systems that we have in Brazil. Well, so let me share my screen to present our big star. Okay. Please let me know if you're able to see. That's okay? Yeah?
Very clear.
Well, perfect. So here you can see the Guarani. It goes through 4 countries, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Brazil has about 68% of the aquifer's territory and is the biggest user. It's responsible for 90% of distractions. In Brazil, it spreads for 8 states. One of them is the one that my university is located, that's São Paulo State, which is here. São Paulo responds for 8% of the use, so most of the use in Brazil happens in this state. And especially here, Ribeirão Preto, we have one of the exceptions of this aquifer because we have a case of overexploitation and some points of contaminations. But in general, it's an aquifer that is not very exploited and doesn't have contamination problems, in part because of its geology. It's a confined aquifer in most of the territory. 9% of the aquifer is confined and only about 10% it's you have a recharge area, which is this light blue here that you can see. Only these limit borders here are the parts that you have some communication with the territory. The other ones, you have a protection of basaltic rocks. So what challenges are involved in the process of valuing the great giant here that I present? Before answer that, I would like to tell 3 stories that happened in the Guarani during my career. The first one, when I worked on the environmental alternatives office here in Ribeirão Preto, it's the case of the overexploitation, and we went to the field. It was pretty common here, ground users saying, I lost my well. In a very resignate way, I could see them declaiming the poem of Elizabeth Bishop, the art of losing isn't hard to master. You lose keys, you lose hours, and you lose your well. Then, my divagation mode was suddenly interrupted by the next sentence, and the users say, I need to perforate another one more deep, or I need to perforate another one with a better pump. The user didn't realize that he didn't lose the well. Lose a well is not a regular event. The well was there. They had to lose the aquifer's capacity to provide water on that level. If users don't understand how groundwater works or its finitude, what has value is the well. So users only worry with the cost to perforate a deeper well. The other curious history is how water managers and society ignore groundwater. I have given many courses about groundwater law, and usually I start presenting Guarani aquifer rock samples to illustrate the dynamic of an aquifer. See, yes, I am a lawyer that carries rocks. So in those courses, I have always asked people, which is the most important aquifer in their city? Most of the time, if water managers are not specifically involved with groundwater, they don't know. That happens even in the national water agents. However, everybody has once heard about the Guarani aquifer, even if it does not supply their city. As I told you, there is not a very exploited aquifer. So people felt linked with the Guarani, but they don't know other aquifers that are much more important to their regional context. They don't have, that doesn't happen with rivers. People know the main rivers. So the good point of this is that Guarani emerges like the main representative of groundwater in Brazil, even though it is not our most important aquifer to the water supply. The third story is with a very dear professor that supervised me in my groundwater path. He's a geographer. He bought a farm with a well. I asked him on the time if the well was registered. He answered, I guess not, but it came with the property and the withdrawal is insignificant. And I insisted. I didn't say that you need permission. I asked if you fill in the registration form in the public and the water public organ. Well, he say, yeah, okay, you are right, but no one will come to inspect it. So we stop being so lawyer. Groundwater and proper are so closely related. Everybody accepts irregular wells. These are my property, so don't bother. And also, they understand the limitation of public inspections. Even public authorities don't bother too much with it. And you see why of this. Inspection of aquifer is a nightmare since comprised the rural territory and there is no Brazilian agents in the organs to do that. These three histories illustrates the problem to value groundwater because we're talking about a resource that is socially invisible. People and social scholars, special economists and lawyers don't understand how it works. And in the end, nobody cares. There are so many rivers demanding attention while look in the subsoil and listen pessimist hydrologists with bad news about unsustainable withdrawals, risk of overexploitation or contamination. Well, despite this, our Brazilian law has the main structures to stimulate the discussion of the value of water. Our national environmental policy and the national water resource policy have stated the idea of the user pay principle to natural resources and including the charge for the cost of water. Also, the Civil Code of 2002 allows that public administrations charge for the use of public goods. And this year, we approved the National Policy on Payment for Environmental Service, which may provide a more comprehensive approach of valuing water. Despite this, the value of water was restricted to charging of water and is used in a very limited perspective. First, many basins have not implemented this instrument to water, surface or groundwater. Second, the price of using water is a symbolic and don't really promote a rational use or stimulate to recognize the importance of water even to the economy, certainly not for the environmental dimension. Third, in the case of groundwater, legal users, which are the ones who pay, are the exception. So most of users don't pay anything and the public powers can only guess how many groundwater has been extracted. I would like to present here a table with the value of charging water in the Pardo Basin that has the municipality of Ribeirão Preto. That is the city that had registered the most worrying situation of overexploitation and Guarani aquifer, and give you some referential points to compare the value in real and dollar of how much you pay for extracting water or consumption of water, and a price of a bottle of mineral water or the value of tapped water. The contrast between the value of the water by the charging system and the water as a product or as an economic service is very significant. However, we don't have studies exploring this dimension or even the costs associated to the infrastructure related to abstract groundwater and their socio-economic impact. The value of charging water haven't stimulated, for example, the Ribeirão Preto's water company to invest in reducing losses in the water net, which are around 40% to 6%. Also, the mineral water industry that makes millions with groundwater is out of the water resource management system, since it's part of the mineral managed system like gold, iron, or other minerals. And we can't ignore that since the consumer of mineral water, which is basically groundwater, is around 22 million liters per year and increasing. Actually, we don't have much, we don't know how much water we extract. And I would like to present another one here is there is no clue about the number of wells. What is for sure is that groundwater users with permissions who are the ones that pays for this water are the exception. In this table, you can see the different estimations and statistics of groundwater from public organs. And as you see here, it goes from few thousands to more than 1 million wells. Only the wells that have a state permission pays if the charging is implemented in the base. So the only ones that will pay are these ones that are in the, registered in the water states agents. So despite Brazil has not valued their aquifers or the cost of clandestine use, Brazilian managers and scholars have to put a special effort into finding the aquifer's value, because estimating the value of Guarani aquifer or any aquifer can help to make users, government, and society realize the need to understand how an aquifer works and manage it properly. Valuing the resource allows the definition of an easy, understandable criteria to anyone in society realize the advantages or disadvantages of controlling measures and protection policies, even thought they represent restrictions in the access to water in the short term. Valuing water, groundwater especially, can help to make better resource allocations among different users or better investments in restoration, conservation, preservation, and developing alternatives of water supply system. It is much more easier to convince people with an economical criteria, which they can understand, instead of using lots and lots of geological data. So I hope that I'm still in time, and that's what I would like to bring to you, and I'm open to questions after Jerome's presentation. And thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you so much. That's a really great start. I think it brings up a lot of questions for me around issues of ownership and looking at issues of accountability. Of course, monitoring is one, but how do you account for these wells, and how do you ensure that the appropriate economic as well as the social cultural values are attached to water? So this is a fantastic start. Thank you so much. Without taking any questions, we'll immediately move on to Irun, but I see some people popping in comments in the chat function, so please continue to do that. And Irun, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. First of all, thank you now and Alan for inviting me. I'm not, do you see the presentation mode now of the slides? Or is it still, for me, it's not in presentation mode.
Right of your screen, this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, should function like this. Okay, so I'm going to tell a story about the largest gold mine of South America, the Anacocha Mine. And the story is about the translating of the locally felt water values and waterscape values to scientific arguments to conserve an area so that the mining companies could not go there. So this is the Anacocha Mine, the second largest open pit gold mine in the world. The surface is at least 50 square kilometers. And yeah, so the local people, if you ask them, they have a clear understanding of why this area is important for them. So for their livelihoods, like you see from this still as an illustration from a documentary called Open Pit, the farmer can express how she raises animals, how the grazing land is important for her. But also the communities are aware that the mine influences the amount of water they can get from the mining area. So my question was, so how can local knowledges and livelihood, cultural, historic, place-based, intrinsic values be translated to scientific arguments? And is this desirable? So apart from this livelihood values of the land and water and the local knowledge about the hydrology, there's also the spiritual or the religious value of the water in this area. Like in other places of the high Andes, you see that people worship the lakes, the rivers, the springs. They see them as living beings, and they pay tribute to them. They bring offerings each year or at special days. And even they think that springs can impersonate, they can become humans and walk around. So there's a strong attachment through this spiritual and religious connection. But my story is not about that for now. What I want to show is this big mining company that is owned by Newman from the US and partly also by Minas Buenaventura from Peru and partly owned by the IFC from the World Bank. It has been producing gold since 1983. It has been producing an astonishing 62,000 kilograms of gold per year, worth some $2 billion per year, well, depending on the gold price and how much you produce. But just to have an idea, that is about, let's say, $5 million per day of gold they extract from the ground. Well, this mine is situated on, let's say, a hilltop. It is at the watershed or the headwater of 4 different rivers in 4 different directions. And in one of the rivers downstream, a couple of kilometers only from the open pit, is the city of Cajamarca with some 230,000 inhabitants that depend from this area for their drinking water. But also in all the 4 watersheds around the mine, there are communities that depend on the water that comes from this area for drinking water, animals, and irrigation. Well, just as explanation, Conga is a new mining site, a new mining concession that has not been put in exploration yet. And there has been continuous struggle and protest and fights against the expansion of the mining and opening up new mines in this area for at least the last 20 years. So what are the main comments we have? So there are direct livelihood, environmental and health problems. So first of all, this big mine occupies a lot of land, so it reduces the grazing land. It reduces the seasonal water storage, but the pollution of the water also causes the death of animals. There's lead and arsenic in the drinking water and mercury in the blood of mine workers. There was a big mercury spill in the year 2000. That's the picture you see above of the hands of this woman being affected. There were over 1,000 people affected. Well, there are rivers for irrigation diverted, so they go from one watershed to another. And nowadays, a lot of these irrigation canals get water from artificial reservoirs, but that needs pumping. And there's river pollution of heavy metals due to runoff, spills, and also acid mine drainage. Indirect effects are the social and political problems. So Anacocha Mine is very powerful in the region. They control the media, they control the police force, they control, let's say, the shopping mall. Everything locally is controlled by this powerful mine. There's no participation of the affected communities, although national and international law requires that. There's expropriation of the land, which is poorly compensated. The company pays little taxes. There is a militarization of the region. And for example, at least 10 protesters and peasant leaders were killed the last 10 years. So what is the narrative towards all these problems from the side of the national government that is pro-mining and the company itself? They say, okay, we can remediate the problems with the water supply by building these big reservoirs, like you see in the picture, the San Jose Reservoir. They say, okay, actually, we store more water in our reservoirs than was previously stored in the lakes. But one of the problems is that, for example, these reservoirs contain contaminated water, but also need pumping to bring that water to the communities. So the anti-mining narrative is that actually this headwater area is very unique. It has a unique capturing and storing capacity, and it's indispensable for providing the drinking and irrigation water. So what I want to focus on now is the process of the regional land use planning that was started in 2007 and ended in 2013 by the regional government. Because the regional government, because a lot of local people are against the mining operations, they elected a government that was against mining. So this regional government had very few tools to oppose the mining. But the one thing they had was the regional land use planning. So through a whole process that is embedded in laws, based on scientific thinking, and in the end, through a whole process of mapping, the map is validated by the communities. But the idea would be that the regional government would come to a map that, according to the regional government, would prohibit the expansion of the mines in the headwaters. And we published already in 2015 an article which gives much more detail. The map they want, the regional government with the communities and with scientists that opposed the mining wanted to produce is this map. And in the end, they produced it, but it took a lot of effort. On the map, what you see, the gray area is the area that is defined as headwater region. And within this region, there should not be mining because it's like the water tower, the water producing area for the communities. And you see down here, the city of Cajamarca. Right now, we have the Anacocha Mine in the middle of it, on the top of the mountain, an operating mine. But also, for example, in red, you see the new concession of the Conga mine that the company, same company wants to start operating. And actually, you see several other concessions that are in this zone. But the regional government had a big problem. They didn't know exactly how to draw the exact lines of this area to delimit the headwaters. So what is the scientific criteria to say that, okay, let's say this part is not headwaters, but this one is headwaters. And the other thing was, what characterizes the headwaters, what makes them so special that they should be protected? They felt like there is this intrinsic importance of this area. They felt the attachments to the area, the spiritual connection with the area, but actually they wanted to find scientific proof for the uniqueness of this area. And that proved to be very difficult. Because what they started was, according to the national guidelines, producing maps. For example, just one thing which is important here is the hydrology importance map. And so they started to have making maps with the vegetation cover, the geology, the soil, the slope. Actually, it was very hard for them to get all the data because the data is in hands of institutions controlled by the national government, the pro-mining in Peru. So they did not get, for example, the geological data because that Institute of Geology depends on the ministry, the National Ministry of Energy and Mining, and they didn't want to give the data. But even if they would have got the data, it would have been very hard for them to have exact definitions that would help them delimit this area. For example, they started to look at the soil. And well, they were expecting that the soil data would reveal a very large water storage capacity, because that is their intuition told them this land is very important. But actually, when they talked with soil scientists, well, the topsoil layer is very thin and poor, and directly underneath you have a hard rock layer, well, with plenty of gold, but not much water. So actually, soil science didn't help them in stating that this is a very specific, unique area that stores a lot of water. Well, then they went to the vegetation. They liked the landscape, they liked the lakes, they liked the plants. And they thought that, okay, they could prove that the plants, for example, the vegetation makes that water can infiltrate better and the plants capture water, and that the plants are also very unique for this area called Chalca or Paramo. But actually, with help of the biologists, that was not much help. Perhaps the plants do capture some water and the roots help a little bit with infiltration, but in numbers, actually, it didn't prove the very uniqueness of the vegetation, also because you can find this also in Paramos in other parts of Peru, Ecuador, Colombia. From the biologists, they didn't get the data to prove that this is a very specific area. So in the end, well, they put together their maps and all their data, did the participatory process, came up with a map, but actually the anti-mining coalition could not really define what are the specific characteristics and what is the exact definition to make it delimit in a certain area. And finally, well, they came up with the map I showed you in the beginning, but that is just saying, okay, any area above 3,400 meters is headwaters. Because they didn't have any other scientific proof. They expected to get it from the soil scientist, from the biologist and others, but they didn't get it. But actually, I think there are ways to find scientific proof and define this the importance of the headwaters. But you have to move beyond mono and multidisciplinary approaches and go to interdisciplinary approaches. You have to combine the hydrology with the water quality, with, for example, human rights. Then you can prove why this area is important. Or you go for the legal approach, but then link hydrology with existing water use rights. or take an economic approach and link the hydrology with water use rights, but also with the actual pumping costs from the artificial lakes, and show that that is a financial non-feasible solution in the future when the mining operations will stop. Or even from the legal political point of view, you could find scientific proof for the claim of territorial autonomy of the communities and the regional government. So actually it was the state regulations, but also the belief of the regional government and their scientists that in the monodisciplinary or multidisciplinary way, they could find the unique characteristics, and they could not. So in conclusion, the anti-mining coalition had great difficulty in translating the water values to scientific arguments. First of all, the lack of data because of political reasons, but also their unrealistic expectations of the monodisciplinary approach. However, I think that translation of at least some of the local water values to scientific arguments is possible, but it requires an interdisciplinary approach. This leaves aside an important discussion about the translation of the more intrinsic values, the religious or the spiritual values, and the intrinsic value of nature, like in the documentary, The Daughter of the Lake, the activist walking along the river asking, don't you understand that you are a living being? So how translate that to scientific arguments? Now, these are the links to the documentaries I was quoting from and taking pictures from. I think this is a good way to end, and hopefully we have a good discussion on it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeroen.
Thanks so much. That was a really rich presentation as well. And it was really good because I was thinking while you were talking, what about the human right to water? Can that feature in? And I think the point you made about the interdisciplinary approach is where potentially some of these debates could come in. I see some comments coming in, so I'll encourage people to further pop in their questions. You're welcome to also raise your hand. There's a little icon on Zoom, so you're welcome to raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask questions. But I wonder if, while people collect their thoughts, Alan, did you want to have any initial comments or reactions?
Well, very briefly, Naho, thanks. Really two very rich, thought-provoking presentations. You know, I was kind of struck by this theme, at least it's something I interpret from both of them, that data ambiguity or lack of data can be quite politically facilitating in different contexts. And in both contexts, it seems to me to kind of lack of data works well for different parts or sides of contested resource environments. So, you know, I wonder, and that does say something, Jeroen, about this whole issue of science and the science of valuing resources from different perspectives, different disciplines. So I wondered if both of you could just comment on that thought. And Pilar, particularly in relation to Brazil, you know, I put in the chat a question, you know, is there a sense of a kind of political comfort zone that people have because there isn't really, you know, very much data or accurate data on the numbers of wells, on the amount of abstraction? Is it a happy kind of comfort zone for government and for private well owners and users? Just a couple of thoughts to kick off discussion.
Well, Alan, thanks a lot for your question. Indeed, we have a name for that in law. We call that the organized responsibility phenomenon. What happens is you have lots of beautiful laws that regulate everything, but because of the application of these laws doesn't go out of the paper. And why that happens? Most of time because you have a strong interest that doesn't want that this happens. Also, the public governments don't want to fight against that. And in the case of groundwater, the social mobilization, it's almost inexistent. People, the only aquifer they know is the Guarani aquifer. So if you say Guarani aquifer, everybody's very passionate. But even in this case, they don't understand the difference because when you talk about Guarani Aquifer, it's a huge complex system with very different characteristics from one place to other. So in this sense, we have really a responsibility organized phenomenon, and there is not so much efforts of the public government to go and make these wells be regular. As you see, I'm going with statistic data. So if National Water Agency estimates that you have 1.2 million wells, why she's not organizing effort to legalize these wells, to make states go beyond that? And you can start with the register. The register of the Geological Service has more wells registered there than the ones that are registered by the states. And why is that? Because the properties want to have some legitimacy over their use to avoid that other use make another well that would create a disturbance in their flux of water resources. But they don't want to do that on the proper form, then they would have to pay for the water. So that there is a completely chaotic scenario.
Thank you, really interesting. And Jerome, in terms of the kind of the science side of this data issue, what do you think? Is it? I mean, you mentioned the kind of politics of not providing data, the politics of a kind of science gap in a sense. How important is that?
Yes, yeah. So there are two sides of it. One is the politics of data in the sense that the data is managed by the national governments or the institutes, the organizations that depend directly on the central ministries. And well, they are not very transparent in their data collection, but also the databases they have, they don't share them, even also on climate. Nowadays with climate change, also climate change data that, let's say 30 years ago, nobody was much interested in meteor data, and now it's worth a lot of money if you have a good database. But they used to be open source, and now it's closed. And also the mining company itself, they have a lot of studies on water quality, of course on the geology. They have to know where the gold is, but yeah, they don't share that information. So as a regional government, you have much less resources. You don't have access to all this data, and that puts you very behind in any discussion on data. And that's the other side of it, because even I think if the regional government, in the case of the Anacocha mine, would have had all this data, even then they would not have been able, in this multidisciplinary approach, prove the uniqueness of that area, because that is much more in what you expect from science, how you treat science, how you think science can work. So that is apart from the data. It's also in the mindset, even of people that have not have studied, or perhaps even more in people that not have studied or are not scientists, but they think that science can give them the answers. And that's perhaps not true. It's much more political decisions supported by data, and at least the data should be available. But then the discussion is what science can do there, and how much of the valuing you can translate into scientific arguments.
Gosh,
Very
that's
good.
really interesting.
Go back to you, Naho.
Yeah, no, I was thinking those are really interesting points about how science can be leveraged, and that there are paper tires. Pilar is talking about these beautiful pieces of legislation that can manage every aspect of our lives, but the extent to which they're used is a political decision. So I think those are really interesting points. I see there's a comment in the chat box by Miranda. So Miranda, if you're able to, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yes, hi, I'm Glacy, and I was about to type a question also for Joren. I'm going to start my PhD in King's this fall, and my first it was more about like curiosity to Pilar is actually about the new project of law of environmental licensing, and how you perceive, Pilar, that this project, if it completely goes through, is going to impact the future of groundwater conscientization. And to Joren, actually is about, I'm curious about the idea of environmental and water heritage and how we as academics should, or if we can make it present in our works, basically.
May I start? Yeah. Well, Glaze, thank you for your question. Well, when you say groundwater conscientization, I don't think that the project will have many impact. However, it will have impact on groundwater protection, because the flexibilizations that this project brings are very concerning, because it removes many the requirement to do license to many activities that have potential to contaminate groundwater. Another problem is that it reduces the deadlines to the manifestation of the environmental organs to present their analysis, which also will have a bad impact. And also, how can I say the word, increase the time of validity of license, and including the operational license. And one of the good parts that protects locked groundwater because of the subject of contaminate areas is because when you have to do a periodic requirements of these permits, this license, environmental license, you have to present to the environmental organ that everything is okay with your soil, your water, that is in the property where you are developing your activities. So if you do that from 5 to 5 years, which is normally the deadline of this license, the contamination is one. If you start to do this from 10 or 15 or 20 years, the period of contamination is much more. So I am very worried that you have an increase of contamination areas, both from soil and groundwater. If you want to talk more about that, I leave my email, because it's a very huge project. Then we can talk each other.
Great, thanks for that. Do we have any other questions that people want to start asking, or some reflections, maybe some insights that complement or contradict some of the stories that we've heard from Brazil and Peru this morning?
I see a comment from Sandra. Sandra, do you want to verbalize, turn your camera on and speak it out?
Hi, good afternoon. Well, I wonder if this event could be shared with other groups and the other speakers. They can easily speak Spanish, but I know also a large group of scientists in South America. They are nice if we can reach these groups, or at least to present these short meetings and talkings to them. So this is just a suggestion for the future.
No, thanks for that. That's a really good suggestion to think about non-English presentations. And I think one of my curiosities is also to figure out what's out there in non-English journals and papers, and it's very difficult to come across them when you've sort of immersed yourself in the English language papers and journals. So this is a useful reality check for me. Thanks so much, Sandra.
Can I add to that just very quickly? So Sandra, I was having a quick conversation with Pia just at the beginning, before we started, actually, about this gap between, well, the language gap, but also somehow the science gap. In the water sector, there's this community in Latin America that has fantastic experience and really interesting work. And there's a development community working in Africa and South Asia, for example. And now they seem so disconnected, right? So, I mean, I think we'd all be very committed to making better connections, whether it's through improved language interpretation, translation, or whatever mechanism. But I think you've raised a very important issue.
Yeah.
I noticed now there's a comment from Fiaz. So, and I'll read it out. It's about the use of smart technologies and techniques for aquifer management. So from IMI's perspective, we are quite involved in that through this GRIP consortium. And I know there are, Grace satellite and other kinds of remote sensing techniques that are developing to improve understanding of the behavior of those aquifers. Is there something there, do you think, Pilar, in the sense of technology taking forward the boundaries of management, improving the strength of governance tools at the disposal of government and other management hierarchies?
Well, I'm not a geologist, so I'm not a great dominant of these techniques, but what I say in terms of what we have applied in our water management system by the organs is not very, how can I say, modern. We are still struggling to implement a monitoring wells network, but for example, the state of São Paulo, which has one of the better one, we have like monitoring wells that would be like 100 monitoring wells in the state, which is not very exciting because it would be like one piezometer in an area of 300 kilometers. So it's not very good monitoring. Also, there is an initiative of National Water Agency, which is doing a monitoring net of wells in all of Brazil, but of course with great limitations, like you have states that have just one piezometer. So if there are other kinds of techniques for aquifer management, but in the end, what we are using are the modeling system and also this monitoring piezometers, only that.
Thank you very much. And Jerome, would the same apply in the sense of, for instance, crowdsourced data in the Peruvian case you mentioned? I mean, you talk about the challenge of bringing different types of knowledge essentially into this whole question of value. Are there entry points, do you think, for smart technologies, for apps, for other ways that citizen science, in a sense, in that basin could be applied to help the understanding of relationships between water and mining and local indigenous communities?
Yes, yeah, I can mention one example, and then it's interesting that also it changes the mind of the people participating. So that is a sort of citizen science where communities would determine the water quality in the streams and the irrigation canals by the collection and inventory of microinvertebrates. So looking at small insects in the water as indicative of certain water quality standards. And yeah, you have to do that with the community over the whole year, because pollution and also the manifestation of these animals in the water fluctuates throughout the seasons. So you have to do regular monitoring, and that can only be done, it's good to do that with the communities. It raises the awareness of the communities about the issues to water quality, also that they can do science themselves. They can count themselves the type of insects they find, larvae they find, and classify them. And also it shows them also how difficult science is, that you have to go there time after time and collect the samples and do the classification, but then also how to present that if you find problems. And the mind says, but that is this stream, but the other stream is not contaminated. Okay, then you have to go to the next stream. How do you deal with the contestation from the mining and the government side? So actually, you involve the participants, the community people with these difficulties of applying science. I think it's very interesting. It has been done in the Anacocha case, and it has interesting results in both getting data which you cannot get otherwise, but also showing the communities what science can do and what science cannot do.
Thanks, Joe. And I see Deb, there's a hand up. Do you want to jump in? Turn your mic on and your video if you like. Go ahead. I think you're muted. Deb, it says Deb, I'm not sure that's your name, but in the absence of Deb, maybe Mariella, you'd like to speak to your point regarding Peruvian universities. It's in the chat. Mariella?
You see, I thank you very much for the nice presentations. And the struggle of the local people.
Mariella, sorry, could you introduce yourself quickly?
Okay, I am Mariela Garcia from Valle University in Cali, Colombia. I really enjoyed these presentations. It's nice to see you, Jeroen. The struggle of the local people against mining is very clear. I would like to know what kind of support do they receive from the Peruvian universities?
Yes, well, that is varying. It depends really on, I mean, there's private universities that would have nothing to do with anti-mining mobilization or data gathering. There's state-financed universities that are mainly teaching and not so much doing investigation. But there are exceptions like it, but the interesting position is the position of the University of Cajamarca, a national university, state-financed university, gets money also from the Anacocha Mine, because that is the treaty they have. I think 5% of the taxes go to the regional university, actually quite some money. So then it becomes also very difficult to be critical. So it sounds nice that the local university gets money from the mining operations, but at the same time, they get compromised and find it difficult. There are exceptions of people supporting data gathering for supporting the anti-mining coalition, but those are rather exceptions.
Thanks for that question, and also for even letting us know the broader picture. When you were talking about the way in which the mining companies control so much of life, you know, they even control the shopping mall, the supermarket areas. It makes me think about this quote about how water flows uphill to power and as well as money in this case. And also in the Guarani Aquifer, I sense that people who do have the land, access to land, and people who also have the access to wells and technology do have a better chance at extracting water. So this notion of uncertainty and ambiguity in the role of science is definitely something that's come through from both of the presentations. But what I'm also taking away is on the politics of it, that there are certain players that are much more powerful and who have the means to access water, and in some cases be able to extend their influence and control such that they control so much of the aspect of everyday life. And I think that for me, that's really striking, that comes through the Peruvian case studies. And yeah, if people haven't seen some of the documentaries, they are really, really good. So I recommend you to go see if you can find it on YouTube or online. They're really, really good documentaries. I see that we have only a couple of minutes left before we close the hour. Do we have any final reflections, comments, points that people want to throw out?
can I pose a final point to both presenters? You know, I mean, all these talks are really about power and the way power is dispersed and used in these waterscapes in these basins and aquifers. So would it be right to say that ambiguity benefits those in power, and therefore kind of ambiguity is a political device used by those in power to further their control, or is that too simple a statement? Over to you.
You want to go first, Pilar?
Yeah, I agree with this state, the ambiguity, and also I would say this lack of information. So nobody in the end wants to go further. There's information, because if they have the information about the wells, they have to take action. So there is a really ambiguous in the public organs to go and implement the law. So let's just flow. That's the I think the sense of here. We have a problem with these permits since the law was created, and I'm talking about our last code that came from the 1934. So there was already a need to register your well, but nothing was made. And within 1907 came the new law on water, also reaffirmed this, and nothing was made. So yes, I think that ambiguity is pretty comfortable because you don't have conflicts. If you start to showing how much users are and how much they interfere between each other, conflicts will arise.
Thank you. Sure.
Yes, I agree. Ambiguity is used in a political way, in the sense, for example, that if there are water samples that show that there is too high mercury content or whatever in a river, then at a later stage they do another measurement and they show there is that they are stay below the norm. So yeah, there's in that way, data is contested, or data ambiguity of doing this sort of measurements and what they say is used. However, also the other side is true. If in the case I presented, the regional government was really trying to have clarity about the delimitation of the conservation area, and they were really pushed to present that also by the mining company. Mining company said, okay, show me what is the limit and what is the scientific proof of that. And so and they could not. But also the mining company, for example, says they are very efficient and they have a closed circuit extraction method. But that closed circuit extraction method is only closed circuit on paper, because you have the mercury spills, there's electricity coming in from hydropower dams, there is contamination going out. It's not a closed circuit, but by calling it like that, that also makes it powerful, and it's difficult to unravel that and show, no, it's not a closed circuit, it's not efficient, it's efficient only in your definition, not in others' definitions. So also by making specific claims, which could also be counteracted, but it's difficult to counteract them. That's also a political game. So it's in both sides.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks both of you. Really fascinating. And back to you now.
Great. Thanks so much for this really rich hour, and for everybody for giving us your thoughts and questions. I think that I want to do another episode on Latin and South America. I think it's so rich, and I think there are a lot of stories and narratives that we could further discover. So in the previous episode, there was also this discussion about doing a part 2 of the Mekong. I think we're going to do a part 2 of this episode as well, because I think it would be really fascinating to hear more about the ways in which the private sector are involved, the way in which land use, for example, is changing, the way in which different investors are looking into how rights can be interpreted. And this really goes into this question about power and influence again as well. So I hope that we will be able to pick up on these themes again and return to this region of the world. I would very much like to once again thank our speakers, Pilar and Irene, because it's been such a great hour. For those of you who are interested, we will have another webinar episode next month, and we'll be hopping over to Southern Africa to think about regionalism and how these ideas about regionalism and ideologies associated with it are successful or not. So do look out for an email that will give you the details of the date as well as the speakers. But next month, we'll be moving over to Southern Africa. Anything else that we need to say before we close, Alan?
No, just a hearty thank you to all our participants, and thanks for all the questions. And thank you to Pilar and Jerome.
Okay, well, virtually we would, in the room, we would do a round of clapping, but since we're virtual, please do know that everybody is, I think, clapping on their screens. And I see these little clapping icons going as well. So thank you so much to all of you, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.